the old Cuba Club, Miami, Florida, and Havana, Cuba. A Calliope and Armando Ruiz presentation. The Cathedral Plaza of Havana. Cuban Baroque music, liturgical music by Cuban composer Cayetano Figueras, 18th and 19th centuries. Glory, Laus in honor. Kyrie, first tone Mass. Offertory, Sanctus, Agnus Dei and Communion, 1801. Written for the Havana Cathedral. Requiem, by 18th century Cuban composer Esteban Salas. Camerata Vocal, Sin Nomen. Conducted by Leonor Suarez Dulcedes from the ISA Symphony Orchestra and the Mozartian Lasum of Havana. Directed by Jose Antonio Mentes Padron. Cathedral Plaza, former Ciénaga Plaza, in the 16th and 17th centuries, is one of the most beautiful places in colonial Havana. It was the last of the main squares to be formed. In the second half of the 16th century, some residents built their homes there, calling it Ciénaga Plaza because the waters which flowed along the town out to sea flooded the area when the high tides came in. For this reason, the first aqueduct of Havana, the Royal Ditch, drained into the square by an open hole in a wall of the plaza at the entrance to a back street called Calle del Churro. The place is marked by a memorial tombstone. In the 18th century, it was transformed into one of the fundamental centers of the city. Well-to-do families of Havana society then built the mansions that still exist. Its appearance and its name changed completely during that century, becoming Cathedral Plaza after the old church of the Jesuit order at one end of the square, later elevated to the rank of cathedral. The Holy and Metropolitan Cathedral Church of Havana, consecrated to the Immaculate Conception of the Virgin Mary, is a Catholic temple located in the heart of Old Havana, in the oldest part of the city, declared by UNESCO in 1982 World Heritage. It is the episcopal headquarters of the Archdiocese of St. Christopher of Havana. The Baroque-style cathedral is considered of the Tuscan current for its two lateral bell towers. The temple forms a rectangle of 34 by 36 meters, which has 3 naves and 8 lateral chapels, divided by thick pillars. The floor is black and white marble. In 1738, the church was the oratory of the Sons of St. Ignatius of the Order of the Jesuits. A few years later it would become the Cathedral of Havana. The sculptures and goldsmith works of the altars as well as the high altar were in charge of the Italian artist V. Bianchini. They were executed in Rome in 1820 under the direction of the famous Spanish sculptor Antonio Sola. Behind the altar you can see 3 original frescoes by the Italian painter Piero Vanni. The other interior paintings were made by the French painter Jean-Baptiste Vermeer. El Patio Restaurant, Casa del Marqués de Aguas Claras. This house from the mid-18th century, built between 1751 and 1775, has a beautiful interior courtyard and original stained glass windows from the 18th century in its upper floor windows. The original owner was Sebastian Peñalver, lawyer, councillor and mayor of Havana, who had been accused of collaborating with British interventionists in 1762. The house was sold in 1772 to Josefa Calvo de la Parada, descendant of one of the founding families of the city, but was later acquired by Antonio Ponce de Leon, the Marquis of Aguas Claras, the name by which the mansion is known today. house of Don Luis Chacon, Count of Casabellona. It is the oldest building preserved in Cathedral Plaza, built around 1720. Don Luis Chacon, military governor of Cuba, lived in this house. In 1712 he was the civil and military governor, positions which had not been previously destined to a Creole. In Cuba the word Creole is applied to a Cuban born from Spanish or European parents. In 1969, after being restored, the Colonial Art Museum was inaugurated and it remains so to this day. China made by European manufacturers for members of the 19th century Cuban bourgeoisie, are preserved intact despite the passing of time and can be appreciated by the public at the Museum of Colonial Art. Palace of the Marquis of Arcos. Located on the east side of the square, it was the home of the Marquis de Arcos family until the beginning of the 19th century. Built between 1731 and 1736, it is considered the most outstanding on the plaza and a work of exceptional value within its time. Palace of Lombeo. The House of the Counts of Lombeo complements with its presence the extraordinary set of buildings around Cathedral Plaza. On the outer wall of the House of Lombeo, we can see an 18th century mailbox, the oldest on the island, is preserved as a vestige of its time. The Wilfredo Lam Contemporary Art Center, located just behind the emblematic Cathedral of Havana, in the old palace of the Counts of Peñalver, a colonial building from the 18th century. It is dedicated to promoting the work of Wilfredo Lam, a great surrealist painter who was once known as the Cuban Picasso. In the heart of Havana, in the Calle Juan del Chorro, very close to the cathedral, the private restaurant, Doña Eucamilla, mixes the modern and the traditional. A very delicious meal. Pizza, coffee, baguettes, spaghetti, crepes, sweets, pastry. A rich and nice place, with affordable prices and first-class service. The Cathedral Square of Havana and its surroundings have countless activities and places to visit. Classical music concerts in the square, offered by the different symphony orchestras of the city, beautiful museums, restaurants, palaces of the aristocracy, and traditional historical bars. Havana, celebrating 500 years of history and culture.